Well, welcome. I'm really pleased to see you here all tonight, and I am delighted to be here to introduce our speakers. I'm Catherine Kroll, and I'm the Dean of Social Sciences. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. On behalf of the University of Victoria community, I wish to begin by acknowledging with respect the history, customs, and culture of the Coast Salish and Strait Salish people on whose lands we meet here tonight. Tonight, the Faculty of Social Science is proud to host the Ideafest, the Brain and Technology, Who's Driving Whom. Ideafest is an annual UVic event, now in its 4th year, and it's actually my first year of experiencing it, so I'm really enjoying it. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to visit the Ideafest website because it lists all 50 events, and there's some pretty exciting stuff still to come. Before I introduce our moderator and speakers, I would like to see if you could raise your hands and let me know how many of you are actual UVic alum. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Well, I'm trying to make my way to meet as many UVic alum as I can, so if I haven't already met you or contacted you, please come up and see me afterwards. Okay, I'd like to welcome our speakers, Kyle Matheson from the University of Alberta, Department of Psychology, Kimberly Kerns, Department of Psychology here at UVic, and James Tanaka, also from the Department of Psychology here at UVic. I hope you're looking forward to their presentations as much as I am. And now, the moderator for tonight's event, please welcome Dave Obey. Mr. Obey is editor-in-chief of the Times Colonist. He has worked as a journalist in British Columbia and Alberta since 1972. He has written a dozen books and given more than 400 presentations at conferences and seminars in Canada and the United States on topics ranging from genealogy to British Columbia history to privacy on the internet. He has received several awards for his writing on history, and in 2012, he was awarded an honorary Doctor of Law at the University of Victoria. Mr. Obey will now introduce each speaker in a little bit more detail. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the Brain and Technology, Who's Driving Whom.
Thank you for coming. Good to see the turnout here tonight. This evening is a series of 3 mini talks on technologies and the brain. The talks will deal with video games that help children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, new technologies in autism research, and cell phones and distracted driving. The format tonight is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Each speaker will be able to talk for about 10 minutes, and I believe each one has a short presentation, PowerPoint presentation for you. Then there will be a time for a couple of questions from each person. And we will need to have questions directed to a microphone because we are taping this. It's being recorded. After the third speaker, there will be time for a brief general Q&A session. And after that, we'll close the formal part of the meeting, and we'll be able to engage the speakers at their displays out in the main lobby. First speaker tonight is Dr. Kyle Matheson. He'll be speaking on driving the brain to and from distraction. Dr. Matheson is an assistant professor of psychology in the Faculty of Sciences, Department of Psychology at the University of Alberta. He is also a psychology alum from UVic. Yay. His field of research is the cognitive neuroscience of visual awareness, attention, learning, and memory. He is currently directing the Mathewon lab in the Department of Psychology at the U of A. He uses human behavioral studies, neuroimaging, and electrophysiological recording to gain understanding of the visual attention system. This includes how the processes are utilized in real-world tasks such as driving and video games. Dr. Matheson.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Can you hear me? Is my mic now on? Okay, so let's get right into it. Say you're driving down the street and a deer jumps out in front of you. You can tell at this particular location this has happened before based off the tire marks. And it seems like some people have successfully avoided the deer, swerved out of the way, and able to miss it. And some people, it looks like, might have shoved on the brakes and not enough time and ran right into the deer. And I'm particularly curious about what distinguishes the states, what states of mind and what states in people's brains might distinguish the ability to quickly react and avoid the deer, or maybe at certain brain states or states of mind that might make it a little more difficult and make you miss the deer until it's too late and then hit it. And so I'll be talking about ways where we can record from the brain and measure people's behavior during situations like this and try to identify and push people into ways where they can be more attentive and less distracted. So one example of something that could distract you from seeing the deer is talking on the phone while you're driving. We all know by now, I hope, that talking on the phone is distracting. It's not the physical act of talking on the phone, it's the conversation itself that's distracting. I've been using this slide since I was an undergrad here, actually, in Jim's vision class. We did a project, and I think I used this slide. We, at the time, did a really, looks now to me, naive study of distracted driving, where people were neither driving nor talking on the phone, but we called it distracted driving. And we tried to submit it recently, and they said, this isn't at all about driving or distraction. So we'll have to change the wording of that paper. So we know that cell phones are distracting, but nonetheless, I'm sure you see people every day. I'm not sure the laws in BC and Alberta that's now illegal to talk on the phone. It's illegal to have a coffee in your hand and a dog in your front seat too, but people do it. You see at every light people texting away and talking on the phone and talking on the speakerphone, which we know is distracting, yet it's kind of more accepted. So people are doing it anyway. Public shaming is maybe something you could try. You could publicly shame your friends and peers, but instead trying to come up with ways where we could make it less distracting. And this is what actually my brother and I one day came up with, and then we built into a research program that we carried out, that you could have essentially a one-way Skype call where you're calling someone who's driving and they show you the road in front of them and they show you their face while they're driving so that you can act like you're in the car with them, because we know that when the person you're talking to is in the car, they're less distracting because they see what's going on and they can help you. So in fact, we had a full driving simulator with a full car. It wasn't a cartoon like this, a real car inside with projectors all around. And we have a pair of friends come in, and one they talk on the phone in the other room, or the guy's in the car with them, sitting in the passenger seat. Oh, of course, that's not going to work now. Oh, there. Sitting here in the passenger seat. So, or they can be driving by themselves, right? And so as expected and as people have shown before, you're almost twice as likely to hit a car that merges in front of you when you're talking on the phone with your friend than when you're not. Or when your friend's in the car with you, importantly. And one reason this is because the friend is just not talking about traffic. They're talking about what they were doing or what they want you to do. They're not going to help you at all by talking about that. Whereas when they're in the car with you, they talk about traffic a lot. So we did just one manipulation to this in one of the conditions where we presented to the guy in the other room a live video of the road and a live video of their friend's face. And now here in this column, we can see that their collision rate goes down to the level as if they're in the car with them, and they end up talking about traffic much more. So sharing a view of the road and a view of yourself puts your friend in the car with you, essentially, and allows them to help you a little bit more. So there's some onus on the conversation partner. It's not you that's distracted, it's the person you're talking to that's distracting. And in India, for a while, they've had these kind of ads that are really graphic, and I'm sure you'll remember tomorrow, that it says here, "Don't talk while he drives." So that's one technique we've been pursuing to try to alleviate some distraction while people drive. We also want to measure people's physiology and their brain activity while they're driving to try to identify these periods where they're distracted so that we might be able to, say, signal people that they need to tune in. Because you can't tell everything just from people's driving. You might want to know their brain state. So my colleagues and I have been developing flexible electronics, essentially a Band-Aid that you would stick on that wirelessly records data from you, say your heart rate or your muscle activity, and then also transmits it wirelessly across the car or across the room. And you can measure, for instance, brain waves, so oscillations in your electrical activity of your brain, just like you could with an expensive commercial device that has to sit on a desk in a lab. So imagine going to Shoppers Drug Mart and buying a Band-Aid that could record your heart rate and play it on your iPhone. We've also developed some what I call kind of hockey tape electronics. When I was in the States, they don't understand that reference. Here I'm a hair model. I was only in this figure because of my hairy arms. My colleagues had more smooth arms. And so this can record with hair. It can be taken off and put back on. And we have people in cars with sensors all over their body. They're wirelessly transmitting data about their eye movements and their heart rate and their muscle activity while they're driving, in this case in response to a car that merges in front of them. So we could try to identify periods where people are mindless driving or distracted driving. For instance, in a study that we've just completed, we have people in a simulator on a very boring drive that you essentially would never be able to do on Vancouver Island. Just a straight Alberta road with no trees, no signs, and one car in front of you. And the car, you just have to follow the car at a certain distance. And eventually people drift off and think about other things. I'm sure some of you were just thinking about something that wasn't my time. And so we, in addition to recording their brain activity with this cap, we also measure their driving performance, and from time to time we play a tone, bing, and every time they hear the tone, they should just tell us whether they were right before that, whether they were paying attention or whether they were off thinking about other things. And so then we can look at the time before the tone at their driving performance. When they just said that they were mind wandering, they were thinking about other stuff. And so for instance, this variable shows that the subjects left more and more and more room between the car in front of them, even though they're supposed to be keeping 2 car lengths. And then when the tone goes off, they go, oh, and they swing back and they get back to the right position. And so in addition to that extra following distance, they're kind of lagging behind, we also see that we can record their electrical activity from their brain and measure the certain frequencies of oscillations, different waves of their brain. And in particular, we measured what's called alpha waves, which are 10 times a second waves in the back of your head that are detrimental to performance. So the more you have these big waves 10 times a second, the worse you are at seeing things around you, which is scary because when people are thinking about other things, they have more of these alpha waves. So people are in this mindless driving, they're hanging back, and they have lots of these alpha waves, and which is particularly scary knowing from previous research of ours that we can see that the more of these waves you have, the worse you are at detecting a flash of light. So we could extrapolate that to a deer or to the car braking in front of you. So we want to get rid of that. We want to push people back into this state whenever we measure they're in that state. So to put these pieces together, moving forward, we have these technologies that are going to allow us to measure electrical activity of the brain or the body in the car while people are driving. For instance, this is something you can go buy at Best Buy, I think, if they have it here. Do they have Best Buy even in Victoria? Yeah, I'm sure they do. But it's only $300, so you can drop it on the ground. But I'll be demoing that after the talks today. So you have some of that, and it's sending it wirelessly to your phone, and your phone is measuring the amount of these oscillations, say, in real time. We've been working with computer scientists that then are classifying the data and trying to predict when people are paying attention while they're driving or they're off thinking about other things. And we're able to do that quite well, so we could identify periods like this and push people back into this kind of state right before, and so to try to, when the deer comes in, they're in a position where they can see it. And we're also furthering developing this technology of a one-way video phone for driving. Since we know people talk on the phone anyway, we might as well try to help them, so we could try to integrate these cameras into cars or create apps that might allow people to talk while they're driving. But the onus is on the people they're talking to. They'd have to agree to look at the road and help the driver if they want to talk to them. So that's everything for now. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Dr. Matheson? And remember, we have a microphone here. Don't be shy. You're all happy you came, right?
The microphone's intimidating.
Don't you wish you'd taken the bus tonight? Any questions? One question, two questions, three questions.
I wasn't sure what you meant by the alpha wave thing. So alpha waves are like basically thoughts.
Not quite, but
you're saying that they're distracting you from performance.
Alpha waves are states that your brain can get in that don't let it process things efficiently. So it's kind of an off, when your brain's off and not working, it's in this state where it's in alpha waves.
It's off and not working.
Not necessarily off, but if you're shutting off the outside world and even thinking about your own thoughts or what you had for breakfast, then you also have these kind of alpha waves. So it's a lack of sensory processing. Yeah, so you're not necessarily sleeping or...
You're multitasking, really.
Yeah, so you're doing something and then
I always thought that was good, sorry. I mean, it's not like...
Okay. Multitasking is good, but not if it does lead to minor decrements in your performance, of course.
Okay, one more question here.
More questions, yeah.
Do you guys look at pupil dilation and constriction with attention? Because I know, like, you can look when somebody's doing a task and their eyes go really wide, and then when they give up, their eyes, like, their pupils constrict when they're not.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
When they've stopped paying attention, is that?
We haven't done that yet, and I know that correlates with some of these electrical measures from the brain that you can get, and so it'll be an interesting thing to look at. One thing we have been doing is using video, which you could use to measure these pupil dilation, to measure people's heart rate. If you just look at how red someone's face is over time, you can pull out the pulses of their heart rate. And so you could use a video from the car or from your phone, and you could track people's eyes, eye movements, and pupil dilation and their heart rate, and try to get further understanding of what happens when we're distracted or not paying attention.
Okay, and last question here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about more about other practical applications you might have in mind. The two-way iPhone has built-in problems because you're not supposed to be using it anyway.
Of course.
So what other ways are you thinking of to keep people more alert? One question. And two is, are levels of experience make a difference? If you feel like you're really very experienced driver, even when you drift off, you come to.
Yeah, so the first question was, we know we can't necessarily implement, we don't want to tell people, give permission for them to use the phone. The real way I think we can make people not talk on the phone while they're driving is go back to manual transmissions and non-power steering and non-power braking, and put big bars all over the car again. So just make driving harder. Driving's too easy now. And it's also getting more and more boring because there's more traffic, there's more times you're waiting at the lights. So you see, most of the time I see people talking on the phone, it's when they're stuck at a light. And then they look up and maybe they don't realize that they shouldn't have gone. So I think one way is we might have to try to change how easy it is to drive, which is an even harder problem, I guess. But what was your second question? I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a scary, it seems, and to me, I am guilty myself. I sometimes glance down at my phone. I feel like I'm an experienced driver. But there's a really scary finding that the better you think you are, this speaks to your point, the better you think you are at multitasking, in a study, the worse you actually are at multitasking. So it's like anytime someone says, oh, I could do it anytime, I'll text and drive, those are the people you really want to discourage from driving.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. James Tanaka, Facing Up to Autism, New Tools for Different Minds. Dr. Tanaka is a professor in psychology at UVic, where he joined the department in 2003. His research examines the cognitive and neurological processes underlying object and face recognition. Dr. Tanaka is particularly interested in questions related to how experience influences the way we perceive and recognize objects in the world. Dr. Tanaka has been working with children with autism in a program that uses computer games to improve their face recognition abilities.
Thanks, Dave. Okay. Wow, it's great to be here. Thanks for coming out for Ideafest. Ideafest has been such a wonderful opportunity for the university to interact with the community. And it's the fact that you guys took the time to come out to hear about our research is really gratifying. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent work that we've started in our lab, and really would be very interested in your feedback and input on this. But we'll start out with a demonstration that my wife introduced me to over the weekend. So one of the ideas that I think is fundamental to a lot of the work we do in our lab is that, you know, we're all different. We all see the world in slightly different ways. And here's like the best example of that. So here is the dress. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but let's get a show of hands here. How many, when you look at that, how many see white and gold in this dress? Good. How many see black and blue? Okay, there you go. So therein lies the issue, right? So I'm a black and blue person. Yeah, me and Taylor Swift are black and blue people. My wife is gold and white. She's like Kim Kardashian. So this is an amazing, I won't even call it an illusion, it's a demonstration of how we have what's called individual differences in the way we see the world. And this is something really fundamental. This is color, right? And so if we see color differently, because we're all staring at the same image, what else can be different? So this is sort of what motivates our lab. So if we perceive the world differently, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, go back. Maybe we also think differently. And so our lab's called the Different Minds Lab, because we're starting, it's a really kind of interesting perspective. If you take the assumption that we're different, that really opens up whole new venues of research. Because now you're saying that there's no normative model of cognition, of thinking. Let's think in terms of differences and how there's variation in thinking. And that's sort of led us to look at autism. So a lot of our work is focused on the different minds of individuals with autism, and particularly children with autism, because I think one of the things we realized is when you interact with kids with autism, your whole sort of definition of thinking and of cognition changes. And it's not that children with autism are necessarily impaired or deficient in cognition. They actually see the world differently. So there's something very systematic about the way individuals with autism view the world. And for a cognitive neuroscientist, cognitive scientist like myself, I'm really interested in that. So actually, go back. Sorry. John and I didn't rehearse. So what do we know? That 1 out of every 68 children now are diagnosed with autism. So it's on the rise. We don't know exactly the cause for this. We think it's a mixture of both genetics and environment, and lots of research is focused on figuring out why so many kids are diagnosed with autism. We know that the characteristics of autism are things like impaired social emotional behavior, challenges with communication, and also repetitive behaviors. But at the same time, we know that many individuals with autism have particular intellectual strengths, so that individuals with autism can excel in mathematics, art, and computer programming. One of the fundamental challenges that individuals with autism face are social interactions, that is, connecting with each other. And if you think about how we interact, the primary mode of communication is through our face and through eye contact and facial expressions. And that's a lot of the work we do in our lab is on face processing. So we took that as sort of a challenge of how can we develop technologies that improve emotional processing for kids with autism. So this is the Center for Autism Research, Technology, and Education, CART. So all the people you see wearing red t-shirts, we're all part of the CART. And our motto is new tools for different minds, because we live in such an exciting age of technology. The real challenge isn't so much the developing really cool new technological tools. The challenge is how can we harness and leverage those tools and get them out to folks who really need them. And so that's the mission that we have at CART. One of the really amazing things that we found is we have a really good partner down at UC San Diego, Marnie Bartlett. Marnie is probably one of the finest computer vision scientists in the world. And she developed this amazing program that can analyze your facial expressions online. So what we know is when we make a facial expression, it's really a coordination of over 50 muscles that we have in the face. And so when we do a smile, it's this zygomaticus muscle is the upturn of the mouth, and the little crinkling of the eyes is the orbicularis oculi. So it's those muscles that, when they come together in synchrony, yield a smile. So Marty's program does this through a webcam online. And so what you see here are those little, what we call action units. Those are actually activity of different facial muscles. So if you look at sort of the activity of your smile muscle, your mouth, and your crinkling your eyes, that combines to give us a smile. So go to the next slide. So we're going to try this. Let's insert live demo. These are always risky, but we have lots of confidence in John. So let me introduce John. John is chief programmer at CART, and John's actually become really expert at facial expression. So here's a live feed of analyzing John. So know that this is actually deliverable via the web, okay? So that these kinds of technologies are technologies that potentially our goal is to distribute them, for everybody. So John, okay, so here you go. John's the little avatar on the left. John, give me your good angry face. So what this does is it's analyzing his facial muscles, and then you get the readout. So, okay, John, give me a surprise. Okay, John's known for his surprise face. How about disgust? Okay, so the nice thing here is you're getting immediate feedback. So what I forgot to say is that kids on the spectrum not only have difficulty perceiving facial expressions, they also are what's called affectively flat. They struggle with producing the facial expressions. So part of the science of what we're trying to do is kind of connect the perception and the production. That is, if you're getting good at producing expressions, maybe you're good at perceiving. But also the other thing about how we use facial expressions in our everyday life, you know, a lot of what we do is conscious, is volitional, unconscious and spontaneous, but a lot of it is volitional. That is, if you go for a job interview, you put on a happy smile. If you go into a party and you're feeling nervous, you smile. And so a lot of our facial expressions is how we regulate our social interactions. And so we think that at least this is a way to kind of, you know, use as a springboard for kids on the spectrum. Okay, John, so I don't know, did we do fear?
Fear? Oh, I'm not good at fear. I'll try.
Okay. You're kind of,
I can't.
okay.
I need to
No, you're smiling. I don't. Okay, yeah. All right. So, so this is kind of the underlying engine, but one of the challenges we have at CART is then how do you take this technology and sort of make it fun? Because what we learned is it's all about gamification. That is, you can have the best treatment, the best intervention under the sun, but unless you make it, in our case, fun for the kids, they're not going to do it. So we developed a simple, what we call a Pacman, or we call a face maze game. And so here, John's a little avatar that he can navigate through the, there you go. It's a little cheesy, but you know, it's. So this is the sort of beginning levels, and we're all actually pretty good at smile. I mean, we're used to smiling. You smile for the camera, but the other levels get a little bit more difficult. So now we're going to mix it up a little bit. And so there's different expressions here. What this is, surprised. And this one is what, John?
Sad.
Sad? Okay, be sad, John. Be sad. Okay. Let's do. You can do that last one there at the exit.
Get to the last one.
Yeah.
We'll skip disgust.
Yeah. Skip disgust. Do.
It's a long one.
Yeah. Okay, so. Yeah. Go ahead and exit. So. Our idea here is to develop these games that kids can play online to sort of practice their facial expressions, and we've actually run some clinical trials, and we found that by playing this game for even 30 minutes was enough to improve the quality of their facial expressions as judged by sort of naive evaluators. So this is a way, again, to kind of bootstrap, to kind of jumpstart the facial processing of kids with autism. And that's really our goal. Our goal is to develop fun, science-based, evidence-based technologies that we can deliver for free, because kids and families who, with kids on the autism spectrum have enough costs and financial burden. So I think, you know, the beauty of technology is you can make it accessible at no cost or very low cost. So that's it. Thanks.
Questions? Show me your smiles.
Okay, so Nerdo with this guy. Okay, so I'm a programmer and I'm really interested in computer vision and stuff. So like, what sort of approaches did you take to find did you segment the face into like different regions, or did you look for different lines, like smile lines? Like, how did you identify between different emotions on a back-end basis?
So I wish I could tell you. I've only been working on the front end.
Oh, really?
The back end stuff is with Emotion.
Right.
It's a company that's working on these.
It's called Emotion, but it looks for high contrast areas.
Yeah.
So the first thing that you notice, there's a face detector. So it's looking for two circles and something that's mouth. So then once it locates the face, then it can register the activity on different facial muscles. But you can see, I mean, what's so impressive about this program is that it's working under very minimal lighting conditions. So you don't need any special, kind of, lighting situation. So you can do it at home, you can do it, in your backyard. And I think that's also important. I mean, if you're going to develop technologies, they better be deliverable. And if you're going to develop technologies for kids on the spectrum, they better work because they're going to get frustrated like tomorrow, immediately.
One more question?
Do you think that because kids practice these facial expressions that you actually are building pathways? Like, is it?
That's the idea. I mean, I think so we get that question a lot. Well, why and why faces too? Because so my research is in face and object recognition, and part of it, I think, why it makes sense is like, and especially in any kind of intervention in autism, this is tractable. This is doable. We're working with the Comox School District who are implementing this. And why the SLP, the speech language people, like it, because this is a skill you can teach, and then you can integrate into the more social context or how you use this. And that's, in autism, that's the big challenge. It's not that you can get kids to smile, you can get kids to be disgusted, but can you get them to understand the meaning of those expressions in the appropriate social context? That's really the challenge for the practitioner, for the clinical psychologist or the teacher or the parent, really, to contextualize those emotions. But I think this is at least a leg up in that, because it's really too amorphous, too vague to say, oh, we're going to teach you social skills. But if you can say, oh, we're going to teach you how to smile, and this is when you smile, and that's exactly how this program's been used by the special ed teachers. Is to say, oh, you remember that smile? Do that when you see your friend, and you can sort of build on those skills.
Thank you. And remember, after this session ends, there will be time to ask more questions to the individually outside. Our next speaker is Dr. Kimberly Kerns, speaking on the Caribbean Quest, harnessing the power of games to improve attention and self-monitoring in children. Dr. Kerns is an associate professor in psychology at UVic and has a particular clinical interest in pediatric neuropsychology, attention, memory, and executive functions. The computer game Caribbean Quest that she and researchers at UVic developed includes therapeutic gameplay for children diagnosed with FASD and autism. The Caribbean Quest game has shown positive results and measured improvements in short-term memory, attention, as well as improved emotional and behavioral regulation. Dr. Kerns?
Okay, let's see. Everyone can hear me? Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the Caribbean Quest, and this is an area or a game that I've been working on over a number of years. So this is sort of a revision after many, many studies. And essentially, let me make sure I got this one. Excuse me. So essentially, we know a lot of kids have problems with attention and concentration, and everyone, of course, has heard about disorders like ADHD, where that's a primary difficulty. But a lot of other children have problems with attention and concentration and ability to work with information as well. That includes children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, children with autism disorders, children who've had brain tumors or cancer, children who are born prematurely, children with various learning disabilities, etc. So there are many, many children who have this difficulty in being able to kind of pay attention and learn in a typical way in a typical classroom. So one question is, why is that? And there's evidence that shows that the types of cognitive abilities or the types of skills that take the longest to develop over time are also the ones that are most modifiable by experience or by things that we do or happen to us. So areas like attention and self-regulation you can think of as developing over longer periods of time. For example, you don't anticipate that a 2-year-old is going to be able to pay attention to something for a long period of time, but by age 12, typically we see more ability to do this. So it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario of this, this development over time. The bad news is that because it's over time and these abilities are susceptible to various things that might happen, injuries, neurodevelopmental disorders, et cetera, that might impact that ability to develop attention and self-regulation. The good news is, on the flip side, that because they are impacted by experience, that means that we might be able to harness them to be amenable to cognitive training and various types of remediation. So my work is looking at those aspects. And so certainly many of you have begun to hear about aspects about how to change your brain. And it's right now quite talked about in the media, brain training, how do we improve ourselves. And that's for everyone from individuals who are getting slightly older, like myself, who is interested in these types of activities, to individuals who've had an injury or children who have difficulties in these areas. So I think one of the things that happens is we now know that our brain changes over time. There's absolutely solid scientific evidence that our brain changes. By the time you leave here, it'll be slightly different. And we do have this neuroplasticity throughout our life. But the question isn't now if it changes, but actually what drives change. And if we can figure out what drives change, then we can use these principles to help create interventions that can make changes and help children improve. So there's a number of articles, there's much research that's out there looking at what types of activities, what types of experience drive brain change. And so these are this is the research that I've been looking at and using to try to help understand how do we make things that will help us drive brain change for children. So when we look at that, a lot of the research comes from animal work, and a lot of work also comes from working with individuals with brain injury, et cetera. So a lot of the background of my work actually comes from cognitive rehabilitation with brain injured adults, as well as animal work and expert learning at work. So one of the things that we know is that in order for an intervention to work, it needs to be specific to the particular cognitive function that we're trying to improve. So for example, if I'm trying to improve attention, then I need to be doing an intervention that requires an individual to pay attention. What we want to do is we want to be able to make that behavior occur. And once we get that to occur, then to strengthen the chances for it to occur. That seems to drive what we call this idea that neurons that fire together, wire together, and helps us create new sorts of paths or strengthen pathways to be able to pay attention. Another thing that's important is what's called the intensity effect. If we do an activity and are able to engage in an activity and make something happen once, that's great, but it's not probably going to change the brain. What we need is some intensity. We have to have a certain amount of time that this happens, and also repetition. We have to do something a repeated number of times to make it happen. So those of you who can remember maybe first learning to ski or learning to drive or some other type of activity might remember that at first you weren't so good, but the more you do it, the longer you do it, the better that you get at it. So this is also true with some aspects of cognitive function. The other aspect that we know is important is that the behavior must be salient. So in order for an intervention to work, it has to be meaningful and somehow rewarding to the individual. They have to want to engage in it or have to have some meaning to engage in it to drive neuroplasticity. And sometimes meaningfulness can also be created by awareness that, oh, what I'm doing is helping. Maybe I should do it some more. That's going to help me. So these are really important principles when we're thinking about driving neuroplastic changes in the brain. So the question becomes, how do you create an intervention that requires a lot of practice intensely of an activity that a child really is bad at and doesn't particularly like or struggles with, and still make it rewarding? So that led me to the computer game. Because certainly we see kids that are invested in things and working quite hard within those environments and finds computer games quite rewarding. So I've worked over the years to develop computer games that would have these capacities within them. So I'm going to show you a short video clip. This is actually from Winnipeg. I have partners in Alberta who are working in this research as well. And so this was taken from a classroom there, and I thought it might give you some idea of what the intervention looks like. So that's a little bit of the Caribbean question. It'll be out in the back and people can look at it. But I wanted to now talk about what are the important components of this intervention and how are we using video games and what are the important aspects of this type of intervention for use with children. So first of all, it's important that we do tasks that are working on the abilities that children are having difficulty with. So these particular games, this suite of games has 5 different games that children engage in, and they're aimed at either increasing attention and visual attention, as well as increasing what we call working memory. That's your ability to hold information in mind and then be able to do something with it. And all of those are abilities that are quite important in succeeding in school and later at succeeding in life. So we have various games to work on various different abilities. The next aspect that's important is that we want to work on these various abilities, but we want to work on them on a hierarchy. So for example, if I'm trying to pay attention for a minute isn't too hard, but paying attention for 10 minutes in a class might be a lot harder. So that's a higher level up the hierarchy. Likewise, it might not be too difficult to pay attention if I'm the only one talking, but if 5 people were talking around you, then it might be a little harder to pay attention. So selective attention is a slightly harder skill. So each of the games are set up to where children start on a first island, which is this very simple distilled skill. And as they work through these islands, the capacity gets to be more difficult. So there are more challenges to it. It's a more challenging task in terms of cognitively demanding. The next aspect is that we want these games to be adaptable because we don't want children to experience long periods of failure because then they're not going to enjoy the game. So most of the games are set up in such a way that as children are working, it's going to push them on this ability to do as much as they can. And if they start to experience failure, then the computer program automatically adjusts it and makes it more difficult. So that what we're trying to do is keep the child at their sort of maximum ability to do this cognitive underlying skill for as long as we can. The next important component is, of course, that it's salient, it's rewarding, and it's fun. So all of the games have, following the hard-working game, a very fun game where children are able to play, there's different games, but they're able to collect what are called sand dollars. And the sand dollars can be used in a store that's built into the game, and they can go in and buy items, et cetera, et cetera. So that's also another important component to keep up the motivation for the harder games, because then the fun games come immediately afterwards and they get their sand dollars. And then most importantly is building in what we call a metacognitive component. And the metacognitive component comes from a coach who works with the children. So children do not sit alone playing a game, hoping that the game is going to improve, but they work with someone who talks to them about, well, what could you try to do? What might we try to do to do better on this one? And gives them strategies, or better yet, works with them to come up with strategies that they think might work, and then has them reflect on, oh, did that one work, or should we try something else? So these are actually examples from an educational assistant where they generated strategies for both dealing with aspects of frustration. Darn. Just no. No! Like that. Okay, we're almost there. And so these are that basically dealt with aspects of the frustration and also with how to get better on the tasks. So the children typically would generate these strategies with their coach who works with them while they're playing the game. So first thing we wanted to find out was, is the game effective? And what did we find out? So we had, first of all, several small pilot studies which showed some positive data. So we then went on to a larger study that was conducted in on Vancouver Island and through some of the local school districts. And for that study, we worked with children who either had a diagnosis of FASD or of autistic spectrum disorder. And with those children, they were given coaches, which were their educational assistants in the school. And so the intervention was provided in the school. And the EAs were trained by our investigators to be able to provide the metacognitive strategies and understand the underlying ideas of what we were doing. Children played the games for about 12 hours total for the intervention, 30 minutes a session, typically 2 to 3 times a week during the school day. So what did we find? Well, on measures of cognitive ability, so these are tests of attention and working memory, we saw several areas where children made significant gains. We also saw some significant gains in terms of improvements in some academic skills as well, including reading and their ability to read fluently and more efficiently. More importantly, we looked at what educators had to say and what the EAs and the teachers saw in the classroom. And what we found there was that, first of all of the kids reported, all the EAs reported that the children really enjoyed playing the games, and they wanted to play them. And some children wanted to play them a lot and wanted to take them home, but that was not possible. All the EAs also noted that there were behavioral and academic changes that they saw over the course of the game, and most of them felt that it was attributable to the intervention. We also saw some interesting things. We saw children begin to use strategies that they had learned during gameplay spontaneously in the classroom. And so things that they would be saying to themselves to help them do better in the game, all of a sudden they were saying in the classroom. We saw children who got much more motivated to improve because of things that they were doing in the game. So for example, we had some children who had a lot of difficulty with math, and all of a sudden they wanted to understand, well, how many more sand dollars do I need? Well, and they began to learn double-digit numbers and things like that because of wanting to play the game, or they wanted to read the instructions themselves. The other thing that we found was children beginning to self-regulate their behavior better. So we had children who, for example, if they had made an error, would become quite frustrated and would often no longer work with the teacher. And through the game, they learned to say something like, oops, try again. And all of a sudden in the classroom, when they were having struggles, instead of having a sort of a temper tantrum, they would say, oops, try again. So we saw a lot of these types of changes and children feeling a lot more success. So where are we going from here? So the CQ intervention, we're going to be back out into the schools next fall, and we're going to be looking at a broader range of children with various types of different attention difficulties. So instead of limiting it to diagnosis for children who had a diagnosis in one group or another, we're going to be seeing any children who are referred with problems with attention, and also trying to use it with younger children. We're going to broaden the cognitive abilities targeted by adding more games that get at some various other aspects of attention that certain children have difficulty with, in particular autism. We're also going to be building online training materials for coaches to be able to deliver the intervention effectively in various places. So one thing that we've had are a lot of people who want to use the intervention, but they don't have anyone available to do training. So we're going to make online training available. And then finally, the next step that we're doing is also going to be looking at what is changing the brain following the training. So can we do pre-post looking at fMRI or various types of neuroimaging to sort of see what's changed in the brains of these children. So any real research, as anyone knows, takes a village, not just one person. I have quite a village that I need to thank. Collaborators in both Victoria here and in Alberta. We had a number of programmers from the UVic computer science program who were involved. And I've had a number of clinical research assistants who've been out in the field working with children and delivering the intervention, as well as other research assistants who've been involved in data collection, et cetera. So I want to thank all of them. I want to thank my funders and the universities who've supported this, as well as the various agencies, CanFESD and other agencies who've supported this work over the years. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank the kids who participated, the schools who were willing to let us come in and do this research, and the families who were willing to share their time and answer our questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Kerns? Going once, going twice.
Lovely talk. This isn't really maybe exactly a question, but I think it's interesting you're using a staircase procedure where if they start having failure, it eases off and becomes easier. And it just seems interesting to me that despite that, most kids at least will push forward, because you might think they would sort of find out, oh, well, if I start having trouble, all I have to do is slack off and it gets easy. But I think there's something natural about the situation that encourages them.
Yeah, and those games are really mostly specific to working memory. And the idea there is it's kind of like what we're trying to do is keep the child at their maximum capacity. Working memory is something that develops, so in younger kids, we don't have as large of a capacity, and as we get older, it gets larger. So what the game does is it drops it back, but as soon as they make successes, then it adds on again. And so it kind of permeates back and forth. So I kind of think of it as a, if you thought of trying to keep someone's heart rate in a particular range while they were working out on a treadmill, then you may need to speed it up for a while if it gets kind of going slow, and then slow it back if it gets going too fast. And that's what the game's trying to do. There's a little less of the self-adjusting nature to some of the attention games. They're just slowly working higher, harder, and harder, and harder.
Okay, so 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with adult ADHD. We were by and large told to just kind of tough it out, take our DAXI, do our CBT, whatever. As much as I like to believe that I'm a big kid, I can't help but notice that these games are like targeted at kids. Do you think the attention-aiding games could be beneficial for like adults to improve their attention, or is it too kind of juvenile focused?
These games seem to have kind of a sweet spot just because of the nature of the games. But in terms of the intervention, certainly we've used these interventions with adults with brain injury. The basic ideas of how they work have been used. As well, there are some people who are doing work with adults. So there are some attention training measures out there. It's hard because right now, as these have become very popular, these brain games, there's a lot of stuff that's out there. And some of that work is based on theory, and is based on efficacy studies, and yes, we know it works. There's also a lot of it that's out there that's just looks good and it looks fun and people are buying, and so we're going to sell it. So I think it's really important to kind of look at who's doing what. For college students in particular, there's definitely some games out there that have shown not only improvements in students with problems with attention, but also in students without those problems in terms of also piquing their attention.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that you are inspired and have been entertained by this. I found it quite remarkable, the amount of work that's being done here, and the impact it has on people off campus. The impact that the university can make in the community as a whole is absolutely remarkable. So thanks for coming, and here's the dean.
I'd just like to thank Dave Obie for being a great moderator. Thank you. And Kyle, Jim, and Kimberly for great presentations. Thank you. I enjoyed each one of them. I'd also like to thank Anne here. She's the one that's been organizing us all and keeping us on time. So thank you, Anne. I know you put a lot of effort into this. And our tech support, John and Dallas. Okay. And John, thank you very much. So I finally would like to thank you, the audience, for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I really hope that you'll take us up on our invitation to join us in the hallway where we will be having some demos. Thank you.